Hello, everybody. What? No. Hello, everybody. There we go. Welcome to FLEXN, guys. We appreciate you guys coming out. Please give a big round of applause to everybody that came out today. My name is Reggie Gray. I'm one of the pioneers of the FLEXN, one of the co-directors of the show, and this is Peter Sellars. Give it up for Peter Sellars in the house.
And in between us are the Americans you need to know. And we have an amazing group tonight because we make this whole performance dedicated to immediate, powerful, and necessary change. That is what the act of dance is all about, and it is what the people in between Reg and me devote their lives to every day, very, very powerfully in different ways. You need to know these people. First of all, please, please, please meet and welcome Danielle Sered, and she is from Common Justice.
All right.
And it is a new idea of what justice needs to become in America. Danielle, would you just say a word?
Sure, thank you. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. And it's been our enormous pleasure at Common Justice to curate this series of Justice Talks before each of the shows. You have on stage with you tonight some of my heroes and the visionaries of the movement for criminal justice reform and for a new vision for America. Our idea tonight and what brings us together with FLEXN is not just about talking and understanding what's wrong, but about being rooted in that understanding and building what is possible in its place. And the folks here with you tonight are some of the people who have done the most to do that, from whom I have learned the most. And we are just thrilled to be in this partnership about vision and imagination together with you all. So thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. I want to just say you have two of America's most progressive and visionary prosecutors, a new generation that is going to move the criminal justice forward progressively. Please, please welcome Kim Fox, the state's attorney for Cook County, Chicago. Completely making history in Chicago, and right here from Brooklyn, thank you. Eric Gonzalez is the acting district attorney of Brooklyn.
Brooklyn in the house.
We have been waiting for him, and he is here. Meanwhile, on the national front, you have the incredible Rashad Robinson, the major activist moving electronically across the country to create new solidarities, new majorities, new sense of people's voices getting heard and counted. Thank you, Rashad. And what a new face of criminal justice reform and vision is in this amazing young man who's young for another day, I think, before he turns 25. And this is the amazing, just amazing Hernan Carvente. And Hernan will tell us about the big picture in a moment. Can I just please, would you mind, Kim, just starting us off with what it means, what you're doing, how you've stepped into the picture in Chicago, and how you're moving it?
Sure. So I was elected on December 1st, or I was sworn in on December 1st of 2016 as the first African American to have been elected to the top prosecutor spot in Cook County. And thank you for recognizing that matters. And it does, because in Cook County, we're home to the largest single-site jail in the country, the largest unified court system in the country. And our jail is 86% people of color, African American and Latino. Our juvenile temporary detention center, one of the largest in the country, is 94% African American and Latino. And running for this office and helming the second largest prosecutor's office in the country, coming from the vantage point of a person of color who grew up in that city, and not simply just having been African American, but I grew up in public housing of Chicago, went to public schools in Chicago, myself had been the victim of sexual assault as a young person, And at the same time, I would share a dinner table with family members who had been defendants and had gone to prison. And so the complexity that is crime and violence in the criminal justice system, I knew firsthand. And yet when we looked at the people who were leading policy around the criminal justice system, many of them, it was an academic exercise. That the first time that they've ever really engaged with diverse communities or poor communities or communities of color was in a courtroom. And so I thought it was incumbent on me. I'd been a prosecutor for many years, had been disenfranchised with the view that we had of not just defendants, but community. A lot of my defendants are also my victims, and they all live in the same communities. And when we had that narrow focus, I felt that we were engaging in policies and practices that were doing more harm than good. And so I decided to put my hat into the ring to fight a brutal campaign. I had some great friends like Rashad Robinson who elevated my race, and Eric Gonzalez who helped me prepare for this. But what we're trying to do in Chicago is frame the conversation around criminal justice reform and public safety in the same narrative. That if you don't have people believing that the system is fair and just and credible, then you will continue to deal with issues of violence when the people who are hurt the most trust you the least. And so we're marrying the conversation around reform and being unapologetically progressive in that stance, because the people who we need to believe us is community. It has to be community focused, has to be community driven, and that's what I'm trying to do in Chicago.
Eric, would you say what it means to step up into your role in Brooklyn now?
Thank you, Peter. So for me, it's very similar of a life experience as Kim. I grew up in the city. I grew up in East New York, Brooklyn. And during the time that I was coming of age as a young boy into teenage years in the 1980s and 1990s in Brooklyn, it was the start and the height of the crack cocaine epidemic in our city. And the neighborhood that I grew up in East New York, was hit the hardest. It has one of the highest crime rates. It was considered the murder capital of New York City, has tremendous poverty, and it was a difficult time. And I, remember wanting to feel safe and lacking safety and security. But I also saw my friends get involved in drugs, in gangs. I lost a lot of friends and family members to violence. And at the same time, I realized that there was a lack of trust in our law enforcement. And so while we needed our police officers and our law enforcement so dramatically in this neighborhood, they weren't always welcome, and often they were considered part of the problem. And as an aspirational dream, my family's from Puerto Rico, but I was born here in Brooklyn, and I didn't know anyone, not a single person who had gone to college. I said, I'm going to become a prosecutor, because I understood, as Kim already said, that the people in our courtroom and the people making decisions on what the community needs should have skin in the game. There should be people who live in the community, come from the community, and care what's in the best interest of the community. And so we all want safety, but the people of Brooklyn, I knew firsthand, also wanted to have fairness and respect and be treated with dignity. And so we are doing the same thing now in Brooklyn, which is we're wrapping the concept of you can't have safety without fairness in our criminal justice system. And so I'm leading many reforms in Brooklyn to have our communities once again trust law enforcement and trust my office. Thank you.
Oh my God, thank you. Rashad, would you describe what it means to mobilize community voice?
Yeah, well, thank you. It's great to be with you all. I run an organization called Color of Change. And we were founded 11 years ago in the aftermath of a flood. Hurricane Katrina that was caused by bad decision makers, that turned into a life-altering disaster by some of those same bad decision makers. And I still remember, I'm not sure if many of you remember, but those images of black people on their roofs begging for the government to do something and being left to die. And while it illustrated so many of the things that we knew about geographic segregation, generational poverty, the impact of criminal justice and what we've done to our planet, at the heart of it, no one was nervous about disappointing black people. The government, the media, and corporations. And when institutions are not nervous about disappointing your community, all sorts of things can happen. And so Color of Change was founded with a single email to about 1,000 people. Right after that TV telethon, the email said Kanye was right. We don't send emails like that very often anymore. But that email went to 1,000 folks, and we have grown to a community of over 1.2 million black folks and their allies of every race that fight to translate the presence that black people have in the world into the power to actually change the rules. And we use technology and new tools, and we have a theory that people don't experience issues, they experience life. That the forces that hold us back are across all of different platforms. And so criminal justice and the impact that we see in criminal justice relies on a media culture to keep it alive. It's why we led the advertiser campaign that forced Fox to cancel Bill O'Reilly and Glenn Beck these last several years. We recognize that economic inequality requires political inequality. It's why at Color of Change, we mobilize our members to engage through our political action committee and district attorney races to change the incentive structure to elect folks and help support elect folks like Kim Foxx, who are going to listen to the community and respond to the needs. And it's why we recognize that in an economic sense, we've got to not just think about how we divest from the criminal justice system, but what we divest in. Because these issues just don't show up in one sector of our lives. They are a result of us divesting from education, divesting from health, divesting from other sectors, and then investing in locking people up and not giving people opportunity. And that will not change by being behind a certain room or having just a certain conversation. It changes by building the type of power for those most marginalized and allies of all races standing up with us and fighting with us. And in this era of technology and new tools, it means using all of those things to work together. So you can join us at Color of Change, visit our website and sign up and join us in this effort.
Hernan, would you just take us right deep into reality, please?
So, and I've had the pleasure of having been with Peter 2 years ago on the same stage. And during that time, I shared the reality, which was my reality for a period of time, the reality of some of the courtrooms and the prosecutors who, on a day-to-day, have to look at young people who committed a crime and make a decision on what outcome this young person is going to have when they end up in that courtroom. At one point, I ended up being in a courtroom in front of a criminal court judge and then a Supreme Court judge with the crime of attempted murder. I was a young person back then. I was 15 when I committed the crime, 2 days shy of 16. For Eric, you would know that at 16, I would have been in Rikers Island and probably facing 18 years or more for the crime that I did. I admitted guilt. I wrote a statement against myself. What nobody knew in that courtroom was that I came from a mixed status household. My parents are immigrants to this country. They're undocumented. What nobody knew is that I started drinking when I was 8 years old. What nobody knew was that I grew up around violence from a very early age, and that I witnessed that throughout everyone in my family. And so, in thinking about what it means to be a young person in that time frame of my life, I couldn't explain to you then how I felt. I explained it through violence, I explained it through acting out, I explained it through behaviors that ultimately graduated to more and more violent activities. And ultimately, I ended up shooting a rival gang member. I was a part of a gang. And I say that openly now because my story is public. But for the many other young people around the country, there are other young people who have that same story and are either incarcerated for life right now. I have 3 friends who are facing life sentences who I write to on a daily basis now. And many of them, again, have the same background that I do. They're Latinos, they're black, they're people who went through extreme pain and hardship and now are sitting in cell blocks facing life and not knowing when they're gonna come out. I had the opportunity of serving 4 years and then being 2 on parole, and while incarcerated, I had a GED. I got into college while I was incarcerated, got 57 credits, came out, graduated from John Jay College of Criminal Justice, came out and started doing activist work, came out and became the thing that many people said I would never become. I was demonized. I was told I was incorrigible, that I was unable to do anything, and that I was pretty much gonna be either dead or locked up for the rest of my life. I proved every one of those people wrong. So what it means to have the bigger picture, what it means to be, that young person that a prosecutor has to deal with on a daily basis, also reminds us of, again, what it means to be a part of a larger community. I was a part of a community. I wasn't just myself. My family was impacted by me being incarcerated. My other extended friends who were actually positive in context also were impacted by it. My daughter, who then was about to be born and was born while I was incarcerated, was also impacted by it. And so ultimately, when we think about the fabric of a community, we remove one young person, we're disrupting that fabric. And so I implore everyone in this audience, when we're thinking about our young people, and you see that mugshot or you see that picture of a young person, don't just think the worst thing that young person did. Think about the other story behind that. And I implore that to many of the prosecutors around the country who have to look at young people and make that decision, because, again, these young people will come out one day. They won't spend the rest of their life in prison. And so what do we want? A young person who's gonna come out and commit another crime or go back because that's their reality? Or do we want another young person who's gonna come out and impact reform, be a leader, be a partner with prosecutors to reform our justice system? If that's what we want, then we need to truly believe that, and I implore all of you to believe that always. Thank you.
Kim and Eric, I'm wondering, would you be willing to just lay out 1 or 2 of the reforms that you are putting in place right now? That would really be fantastic.
Sure. Thank you for that. One of the things I did before I even took this job, I worked for our county board president, and we fought and won raising the age in Illinois for juveniles so that arbitrary number of 15 to 16 wouldn't determine whether or not we treated someone whose brain development is still going like an adult or a juvenile. So I know New York is finally catching up with with the rest of the country, or if they haven't, I certainly hope that they do. But 2 of the things that we've been working on in Chicago, one is around bail reform. My office recognizes that we have many people who are in our jail. Again, we have the largest single-site jail in the country, are in our jails not because they are a threat to the public. They are there because they have an inability to pay their bonds. 70% of the people who are in our jail are there for nonviolent offenses. Most of them are there for drug offenses or offenses that are related to drug use or mental health issues. And so what we've done is we've partnered with our public defender to identify people who have been literally languishing in jails for weeks and months because of their inability to pay, finding them, and presenting motions to the judge to have them released on their own recognizance. And we are no longer asking for monetary bail on misdemeanors and certain felonies so that we can make sure that our jails are not being filled with people who would be better served in their communities, because to the point that was made, the absence from the community while awaiting trial makes the outcomes worse. And so having the prosecutor lead that is a new paradigm. Prosecutors generally do ask for high bails or stay out of it, but we are leading that effort. And then another thing that we're working on, having learned from the success in Brooklyn, is revamping our wrongful conviction unit and being more thorough and thoughtful about looking at past mistakes that have been made in the criminal justice system. Just in the 5.5 months that I've been there, we have vacated the convictions of 4 juveniles who were convicted of murder 20 years ago where the evidence didn't support it. We just vacated a conviction of a 37-year-old man who was incarcerated as a juvenile at 15 for arson based on junk science. So really taking the time to recognize that in order to build that credibility with the public, it means owning the mistakes that you've made, acknowledging them, and correcting them. So wrongful convictions and bail bond reform are 2 of the big things that we're working on right now.
Thank you. Thank you.
In Brooklyn, we had a problem with wrongful convictions that my mentor and my good friend Ken Thompson started a conviction review unit in 2014, and I was fortunate to have been serving as his number 2, his chief assistant at that time, and he asked me to put together the best conviction review unit in the country. And we did that by doing things I had never done before. We assembled a team of dedicated prosecutors who had the experience to investigate these cases. We hired detective investigators to look at those cases, and then we had an outside panel, an independent review panel of top-notch legal scholars who sat in and also offered an impartial opinion about the cases. And what we found was in Brooklyn there had been hundreds of cases where there had been questionable convictions. We've vacated in the past 3 years 22 cases of people who were wrongfully convicted for murder and other serious offenses. People had been in prison for upwards of 30 years. And there's so much more for us to do, and if you think about that for a moment, that's the type of thing that could really and had really impacted people's trust in the criminal justice system. If you have people in jail for crimes they didn't commit, it undermines public trust. It also means that the true perpetrators were left free in our communities. So the wrongful conviction work was very meaningful, and we continue to do this, but we also understood in Brooklyn that there was a problem with how historically we had been treating young people that came into our courthouse. And in Brooklyn last year, I created a young adult court. And it did something that hadn't been done before in anywhere in New York State, which is if you were between the ages of 16 and 24, you were eligible to participate in this program because the brain science had said that people their brains weren't fully formed until 25. I think we all know if you have young kids tend to make bad decisions. And so what we were doing in Brooklyn for 20 years that I was a prosecutor is we had young men come in, mostly young men of color, come in for low-level offenses, plead guilty, get a couple days jail, maybe a couple days community service, and we just sent them back home to your communities with nothing much more done. There was no effort to look at the underlying causes of why they were doing this. So now we did something different in Brooklyn, which is we have a young person, they come in, they're assigned an attorney, and after they get arraigned on the case, the next person they meet is a social worker. And the social worker attempts to figure out what's going on with this young person, why are they committing the offenses that they're accused of committing, what are the needs, is there a substance abuse problem at home, is there a mental health issue, are there anger management issues, what can we do to make this person change the course and the direction of their lives. And again, the science says in this age group, in this cohort of young people, they're most responsive to therapeutic training. And so much of what we then do with them in the courthouse is therapy and counseling and treatment and moving them away from the need to commit these offenses. And then I'll do something that I think is incredible because, prosecutors' offices across the country are always judged by the metrics of how many trials you do and what your conviction rate is and how effectively you put people in prison. if these young people complete the court mandate, I'll dismiss their cases so they won't have this collateral consequence for the rest of their lives. And in this way, it promotes public safety, because after we've done the training, I know that a young person who's in the system because they have an anger management issue and they've gone through a series of anger management and peacemaking sessions will be less likely to commit those offenses than the person who just spent 5 days in jail. But I also know that without these collateral consequences that affect them getting jobs, continuing in school, and all the impact that having a conviction means for young people, then they get left with limited opportunities, right? Very limited. And that's what I saw in East New York. When I go back home, I see the young men that I grew up with who had made mistakes. A lot of them are stuck, could not get the educational, occupational opportunities. So I dismiss these cases in the interest of promoting public safety and making sure that the criminal justice system is fair and takes the appropriate second chances on our young people. And I've also, as a big initiative now in Brooklyn, is I've hired immigration attorneys. And I've hired these immigration attorneys because so many people come into the criminal justice system, and they can be here in an undocumented status, but often in Brooklyn they're here with green cards and visas, and these low-level offenses will mean that they'll be unfairly deported. And so in Brooklyn, we're going to make sure that we provide adequate legal services to all our residents, whether you're a victim or you're a witness or you're accused of a crime, that we all have services provided so that the criminal justice system should be open and transparent and fair, and so someone who's coming into the system understands the consequence of a low-level plea. And I'm not going to take too much more time, but I can tell you the number of people who are either denied citizenship or naturalization or denied reentry or deported because 10 years ago they pled to a shoplifting case or a possession of marijuana or some other drug. And that doesn't seem fair, and that doesn't seem right. And what's happening, what's coming down from Washington, D.C. is this need to use the criminal justice system to somehow use it as an instrument and a tool to fulfill whatever immigration misguided policies, in my opinion, they have. But they're looking to use the criminal justice system for the wrong purposes. The purpose of the criminal justice system is about fairness and safety, and not to be a workaround against the immigration consequence. So in Brooklyn, we're going to do something different, and we have been. And I've been very happy with the response that we've seen around the country as other district attorneys are starting to provide these services. Thank you, Peter.
May we thank these people, please? Yes, let's live in that country. Okay. Meanwhile, time to get some dance happening, okay? Let's continue the movement.
Let's go.
Okay, Regg Roc Gray, you are there with one of the founders of FLEXN itself. Reg is the OG who is responsible for the invention of pausing.
Right.
Pausing is like when you're looking at a movie on your phone and you stop it and you move it back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And you get the inner move, the outer move, you get the push forward, the push back of the world that resists what you're trying to do, and then you have to push back and resist again. That is Regg Roc Gray, okay?
That's me, that's me.
There are 4 other main moves you're going to see tonight. One is get low, what it means to actually be able to dance fast and move on your knees, because you have to fly under the radar. You have an entire culture, you have an entire economy that is under the radar, has to pass undetected. And so get low means you get low, you stay humble, you stay smart, and you move fast. Virtuosically. Next, of course, is gliding, and that means your life is facing every obstacle on earth, and you got to be smooth, and you got to move through it. You got to be able to move through it and glide, and nobody has to know how you got from here to there. You just appeared magically. That is gliding, right? You're also going to see bone breaking. Every single day, they break every bone in your body, and you've got to reconstitute and reinvent yourself with whatever is left brilliantly, and reinvent yourself every single day. Bone breakers are just sheer genius.
Yeah, I can't do it though.
No. and respond back to the violence with super creativity and brilliance of invention. And of course, connecting. And what connecting means is you connect every part of your body to every other part of your body. You connect every part of your life to every other part of your life. You connect everyone to everyone else. You connect your issues to everybody's issues. And you are the center of this ongoing, expanding, hyperactive, lightning quick network of instant connectivity. And that is moving through your body.
Let's go.
Let's go?
That's
Oh, I should just mention one more thing, right? Grooving, right?
Grooving,
Because,
yeah,
of course, the tradition comes up through Jamaican Bruck Up and through Jamaican dance hall. You'll get that, but grooving is staying in the groove.
Right.
Because the world is trying to throw you off your groove all the time, and the answer is stay in your groove, right? And just do not let anything explode it. I want to emphasize to you what you're going to see tonight is improvised. These are brilliant master artists improvising moment after moment, deciding, making super wild, dangerous, brilliant decisions over and over again in real time. Hello, a little like life. Yes, let's go! Music!
Let's get it.
Thank you, panelists!
Can I say something real quick? Can I say something before we get the music going? One thing, right? This is what we're gonna do, guys. In New York, right? We all heard it. If you see something,
Say something.
if you see something,
Say something.
so when you see something that you like, what you gonna do? That's what I'm talking about. Let's get it.